When Ford first introduced the Mustang back in 1964, the car was quite a game changer. It offered sports car styling at a highly affordable price, less than $2,400 at the time. But the Mustang's always had a bit of a dirty secret. The regular car doesn't really have the performance to back up those looks. However, there have been sporting Mustangs that do have the pace to go with those good looks. And the very first one of these is down to a man named Ars Shelby. You see, back in 1965, Ford wanted to take the Mustang racing to give it some credentials. They spoke to Shelby, who was a successful race car driver and quite a good car engineer in his own right. He was also responsible for beating Ferrari at their own game at Le Mans with the Daytona Coupe, and later on also turned Ford's GT40 into a winner. But with the Mustang, Shelby took the car, put in a hotter V8, took out the back seats, fitted bigger brakes, slightly better suspension, some lighter body parts, and they took it SCCA racing, where it started to blitz everything in sight. The car is now in its 5th generation and doing as well as ever. It's possibly one of the most exciting cars Ford have come out with in years. And the prospect of driving one in anger on track was enough to have me waking up at 4:30 on a very cold and wet morning, late fall last year, to go and drive it at Lime Rock. Internally it's known as the Voodoo. It's a 5.2 litre V8. It makes 526 horsepower and 429 pound-feet of torque. It's the most powerful naturally aspirated V8 that Ford have ever made, but there's something particularly special about it. With the Voodoo, Ford used what's known as a flat plane crank. This is the same kind of crankshaft that Ferrari use in their V8s, for example, or race cars. Now, the advantage of a flat plane crank is that the conrods are attached at 180 degrees apart from each other, rather than 90-degree intervals. That means you can spin the engine much faster than you're able to with a crossplane. And as we all know, power is a function of torque and revs. The more revs you have, the more power you get. And boy, does this engine rev. In fact, it redlines at 8250. They've done a lot of work to the rest of the car as well. There's a different transmission to the normal Mustang range, a Tremec TR3160. There's no automatic option, which should make people happy. The transmission itself has been heavily reworked to ensure that it's suitable for track work. You see, Ford have definitely focused on making sure this car can stand up to all-day lapping sessions in the summer heat. There's a lightweight flywheel, there's a dual-disc clutch, they've even taken weight out of the whole gearshift mechanism. The suspension is heavily revised compared to a normal Mustang, with extensive use of aluminium to lighten weight, and even asymmetrical springs at the back. Ford discovered that if they were both coiled in the same direction, you see, the rear, left and right wheels would behave slightly differently in corners. For the first time, Ford's added MagneRide, magneto-rheological dampers to you and I, that adapt to road conditions every 7 milliseconds, and also allow for 5 different suspension modes that you can switch through, from weather, where it reins everything in case it's raining, all the way through to track and drag if you want ultimate performance. The brakes are also heavily uprated. The rotors are iron, ventilated and cross-drilled naturally, and they're connected to aluminium hats via pins that Ford says they used so that the iron rotors can expand and contract with a little room without affecting the hats and also without transferring heat to them. Again, looking at that problem of how do you lap a track all day without the car overheating. It rides on 19-inch wheels, including on the GT350R, which is the very hottest version, for the first time ever for a mass manufacturer, carbon fiber wheels. The GT350R's wheels, in fact, weigh a scarcely believable 18 pounds. Ford told us that the same size wheel, if it was made out of aluminium, would be almost double the mass. And since wheels are unsprung mass and rotating mass, every ounce that you can take out of them is worth several that you can remove from elsewhere in the body. It also has custom-made Michelin Pilot Sport or Pilot Sport Cup tyres, similar to the ones you buy off the shelf, except these ones have a unique compound, a different tread pattern, and an individual sidewall construction specific to the Mustang. Even the body is being changed. Everything forward of the car's A-pillar is new, and the hood sits down much lower. The front grille is made from injection molded carbon fiber, which improves chassis stiffness and weighs almost 25% less than a normal Mustang grille. And there's also downforce. In fact, Ford tell us that the GT350R makes more downforce than a Porsche 911 GT3. That's quite some achievement. What's the GT350 like to drive? Well, unfortunately, on the day that we got to drive the car, it was raining quite heavily, which restricted our ability to test the car right to its limits. The sensation of revving a Mustang out beyond 6,000 RPM is actually quite surreal. The engine note keeps rising and rising, and you think it's time to change up and realize, nope, you have more than another 2,000 revs to go. If you want to mess around, the back will play a little bit, thanks to the limited slip differential, although we obviously suggest you keep those kind of shenanigans to a closed racetrack. But overall, this is certainly the most credible performance version of a Mustang we've ever driven. The brakes stood up to anything we could put them through. The tyres always had plenty of grip. The steering was good. You can switch between 3 different modes that affects the weight of the steering but doesn't really change the feel. And the suspension was always able to cope at anything we could throw at it, both on the road or on the track. All in all, the changes add up to quite possibly the most credible Mustang ever. What's more, it's not even that expensive, particularly when you compare it to rivals like Chevrolet's Corvette or something more exotic from Porsche or Ferrari. The base GT350 starts at just $56,495, and if you're planning on doing a lot of track work, and if you're buying one of these cars you probably should, the GT350R starts at just over $62,000.